On Thursday, Senate Democrats and the White House reached a deal to prevent a partial government shutdown, but time is ticking away as the legislative body still needs to vote on the spending package to fund several federal agencies. Will this crisis be averted? Well, CGTN's Owen Fairclough joins us now to answer some of that. Owen, great to see you. What is happening now on the Senate floor? Has there been any progress?
It's hard to believe, isn't it, Anand, that we're here, 2 months after a record-breaking federal government shutdown in the US. But once again, the clock is ticking. And as you mentioned, those senators in the US are on the floor right now preparing a series of votes. And we can see images there from the US Senate to fund the federal government through September. And as you mentioned, some of those departments have been already funded. So it's not quite as critical as it might look, but nevertheless, it's perhaps inevitable that given the events in Minneapolis, 2 tragedies amid protests over the Trump administration's hardline immigration enforcement program, events that have gone global would now be at the center of another federal government shutdown. And here's where we are, Anand. It was essentially Democrats appalled by those scenes in Minneapolis, objecting to the continued funding of the Department of Homeland Security as part of this funding bill. Essentially, that's been resolved with a deal with Donald Trump, some rare bipartisanship in these highly polarized times, to essentially hive that issue off, kick it down the road a little bit for the next couple of weeks so that Congress gets an opportunity to discuss the Department of Homeland Security, the kinds of measures and the kinds of protocols that these immigration enforcement agents that you can see there should be conducting in. So as things stand, the Senate needs to vote, as you mentioned there. They've got essentially until midnight to do this before, in theory, the federal government or parts of the federal government would shut down. The problem here, Anand, is that the House of Representatives has not been in session this week. They're back on Monday. Any deal has to have their approval, their sign-off. So in theory, the federal government, or I should say parts of it, could shut down over the weekend. But the indications in the past hour or so, just before we came on air, is that some of those issues have been resolved and that these senators should be at least be able to do their part for the House to come back on Monday and do its part. Anand.
So, Owen, as I understand it, there's several amendments being debated and voted on right now in the United States Senate. And as you point out, on the controversial issue of money for the Department of Homeland Security, ICE falls under that department. Well, both sides have bought themselves some time, or they've kicked the can down the road, depends how you look at that. And as you point out, once they vote on that, and that could take place after the weekend, then it goes to the House. When the House goes back into session, what happens then? Well,
one of the early indications on Thursday was House Speaker Mike Johnson not confident of a deal, a little bit cryptic. But again, they're not in session. And let's remember, this does have the blessing of US President Donald Trump, who's been ruling predominantly by executive order, has the House pretty much sewn up. So it would be a big surprise if they were to go against Trump himself. That said, there is a lot of anger among Republicans about these measures. Just before we came on air, the Alabama Senator Katie Britt was talking, a very impassioned speech, talking about the need to defend borders, those kinds of Republican talking points. And the problem here is Democrats and Republicans are still at loggerheads over this. One of the reasons it's come to pass and the reasons these senators are voting so late is that Senator Lindsey Graham, he's a Trump loyalist, he objected to many of these measures. In fact, he wants more federal cooperation. He wants local authorities in cities like Minnesota to offer more cooperation and to be compelled by the law to do that. That's controversial. Minneapolis is what's called a sanctuary city, which has limits on what law enforcement can do, particularly in terms of people's immigration status. That's one of the things at the heart of this. Democrats, well, they want the ICE agents to end roving patrols. They don't want them wearing masks. They want them to be carrying ID. All of the things that are at the center of these complaints about what's considered heavy-handedness by these ICE agents. But many Republicans support their work that they're doing, so you get an idea of how far apart they are, and this issue won't be resolved anytime soon. Anand.
Thanks, Owen. That's CGTN's Owen Fairclough reporting there. Well, to continue our conversation now, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Antigua, Imani Cheers is a cultural curator and an associate professor of digital storytelling at George Washington University. Here in Washington, D.C. is the rest of our panel. Abel Nuñez is the executive director of CARECEN, that's the Central American Resource Center. John Tamny is president of the Parkview Institute and editor of RealClearMarkets. And Brendan Bryce is a conservative columnist and secretary of the Delaware Republican Party. Welcome to all of you. Brandon, let me start with you. As we just heard, Senate Democrats and the White House reached an agreement on Thursday. Senator Lindsey Graham, who is the Republican senator from South Carolina, he initially threatened to hold up a vote until he got assurances that there would be legislation that the Senate could vote on sanctuary cities. We just heard our reporter talk about sanctuary cities there. These are Democrat-controlled cities which offer, as the title suggests, sanctuary and protection to migrants. Now he has that assurance from the leader in the Senate, John Thune. So what is your assessment of this vote? Is it a victory for the Republicans?
I think it's a battle cry for Republicans. I think one of the challenges that you're starting to see, people are, the Senate is starting to reevaluate funding specifically for organizations like Department of Homeland Security and even the Interior. When you're looking at ICE, this ICE issue, Anon, is going to be a very important, critical issue, because as we're starting to see, even though the president, I think, is doing what he said he was always going to be done, it's how it's being done that now you even have senators that are saying it's gone too far. And when you think of senators like those in Florida, Texas, California, who have to deal with this issue head on, they're starting to say, until we talk about how to fix this ICE issue and how to handle the immigration catastrophe that we're seeing in Washington, we're going to put a hold on it. So I think this is the beginning, Anon, of things to come.
John Tamny, put this spending bill into perspective for us. It's a $1.2 trillion funding package. It passed in the House, but it failed in the Senate. Now, in addition to funding for the Department of Homeland Security, as I pointed out, under which ICE falls, then it will also provide money for the Department of Defense, the Department of State, Transportation, Health and Human Services, and Education as well. So how significant is this package, and what happens if there is no quick passage?
Well, it's always got to be remembered that governments can only spend what they take from us first, and Washington's no different from that. Economists like to say, and they focus on GDP, they say, well, government spending adds to economic growth. But as logic dictates, economic growth is an effect, or GDP and government spending is an effect of growth that already happened. Governments collect the taxes, then they spend the money. And so the idea that if we cut some of these government programs, or if we weren't spending money on them for a time, that would somehow hurt the economy, really defies basic economics.
Okay, Imani Cheers, there are 6 funding bills in total, and they will be voted on. Democrats initially threatened to defeat the bill, as I pointed out, as there's more funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which in turn funds ICE, of course. When you look at what's happened over the past few hours, really, did the Democrats cave?
Absolutely. But this is what this Democratic leadership has shown the American people, that they are not willing to go the distance. We saw that with the previous government shutdown, the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. And we're seeing it right now with the threats. We thought that, again, everything that we saw coming out of Minneapolis was really going to be a turning point. The murder of Alex Peretti, the murder of Renee Good, the murder of, unfortunately, a number of other people as well, that we thought we were going to get some serious traction in saying, no, we are not going to continue to fund ICE at these astronomical levels. And unfortunately saying, please, we're body, cams, turn them on, unmask yourself, have different types of ID. That's just not going enough. It's not going far enough. And unfortunately, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have once again failed the American people.
But why as you point out, did they fail the American people? I mean, do you think that they had polling that told them that, look, if we block this, we'll be on the wrong side?
I think what we're lacking is the critical thinking skills and the common sense. And so polling, or whether or not they're just looking and paying attention and seeing with their eyes. We saw today journalists journalists, in particular 2 Black journalists, who were arrested for covering a protest at a church last week in Minneapolis. And so we're seeing that this current Trump administration is going to do anything that they want. And we need to have other elected leaders who are going to stand up and say, wait a minute, that is unconstitutional. That is not correct. You cannot arrest journalists. You cannot, fire weapons and murder U.S. citizens. This is what we're not going to stand for. And every time that we don't allow the same fervor that the GOP is moving, we don't have that in the Democratic leadership at the moment.
Abel Nuñez, what is your assessment of what has taken place in Congress? How big a blow is this for migrants and their safety, their security, and of course their future?
Well, if we think about it, we're discussing a new funding bill. In the big, beautiful bill, they got over $8 billion. And so the damage has already been done. Even if they don't get this funding, ICE and all the immigration law enforcement, such as Border Patrol, HSI, will have what they need to implement the president's wishes. And that is really sad, because I think we're having a discussion of semantics. I think the battle has already been lost, because the current government is unwilling to hold this government accountable in the way they're breaking our Constitution. They're not following the law. They now have even killed 2 American citizens, and there has been not one hearing on the issue. So beyond the funding aspect of it, you have one party that doesn't have courage, which are the Democrats, and then you have another party that capitulates 100% to this president. This is not a Republican party, this is Trump's party. And then you have the Democrats that are unwilling or unable to do what they need to do to ensure that the rule of law is what governs this country.
Right. So, Abel, as you point out, 2 people have been killed. 2 American citizens have been killed by ICE. There's, in fact, 32 people who've been killed in total who have been in ICE custody. So looking at what has happened now, Abel, what would you like to see happen? I mean, the Democrats put some conditions. We don't know whether those conditions are going to be met. As our reporter told us, they want things like tightening the use of warrants. They don't want the ICE agents to use masks. They want to enforce a code of conduct. They want the ICE agents to use body cameras as well. Is that going to be enough? Because there are Democrats on the left of the party who are saying ICE needs to be abolished completely.
Well, I do think that, look, we do need a police force to ensure that we can manage the border, manage people coming into this country. It is the right of a sovereign nation. Having said that, there's a way in which you do it. And it is very sort of clear that this administration is powering through what it wants, and very hypocritical in that sense for Republicans, because when they're talking about sanctuary cities and trying to force them to help law enforcement, that's a states' rights issue. If it were in other circumstances, Republicans would be up in arms about allowing the federal government to dictate what a local municipality or a state can do. The other part of it, when you have the gentleman that was killed, Alec Pretty, that was carrying a gun, Republicans should be outraged at the fact that he was being accused of being a domestic terrorist while he was just exercising the second right. So I think that there's an incredible hypocrisy by the Republicans about the way they're managing this. They're capitulating to this president, and is putting this country in danger not just to the immigrants, but to every American, because they are more than willing to stretch or even break our Constitution.
Brandon Bryce, talking about states' rights, it looks like the push back is coming now from states. I mean, we have Democrat governors around the country who are moving fast to counter the Trump administration's policies, its deportation policies, I should say. They're pushing legislation that will limit what these federal agencies can do in their states. If that happens, what does that do to the Trump agenda?
Well, again, I think, and let's be clear on this, I think we're talking about 2 different things. On the one end, this president is cleaning up the mess that happened from the Biden administration, letting in almost 20 million undocumented people. People aren't saying the what is the problem. They're saying it's the how. And I'll actually, for the first time, I'll agree with my colleagues on here. You know, anytime you cannot see a person in law enforcement's face or they're randomly checking papers, this is a bad sentiment for the country, regardless of what side are you on. We're talking about due process. We're talking about sending people back who have broken the law and don't have and are undocumented, not randomly picking people. And so again, I think if you're the Trump administration, you've got to say, how does this impact the midterms that are coming up and even moving forward the next upcoming election? And I can tell you, states like California tried this before and they haven't had another Republican voted since. When you think about undocumented people, you forget to think about those who vote, those who have relatives who are undocumented, those who have friends that are undocumented. They vote, and people have small memories. And so I think it's going to be very interesting where governors, Anon, are starting to say, can we do this process much more efficient and safer? We're still pushing human dignity.
Imani, what do you make of that? I mean, Brandon Bryce makes the point that what Donald Trump is doing right now is cleaning up the mess that was caused by the previous administration, the Democrat administration of Joe Biden. Imani, did you hear me?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yes, that was for you, yeah. Yeah, can you hear me, Imani?
Oh, sorry, Anand, you cut out there. I apologize. But I will say that I'm really tired of us continuously blaming the current situation on the previous administration. The border crisis has been a crisis for at least the last decade. So, and in this last decade, we've seen a Trump presidency as well as a Joe Biden one. So I don't think it's fair to continue to constantly use the talking points that we're just trying to clean up the mess that was left. What Donald Trump should be focusing on is cleaning up the mess that he started, and he's currently continuing by having these ICE agents literally have no consequences, no accountability, literally going rogue throughout city to city, state to state, the practices, using children as bait, as leverage against their parents. If you have actual evidence that someone is in this country illegally and they have committed crimes, then everybody can probably agree that those individuals should not be here. But that's not what we're seeing. That's not what we saw with Renee Good. That's not what we saw with the other 32 people who died in ICE custody over the last several weeks. That's not what we're seeing. So yes, I agree with Brandon. The how is the major issue, and the how is what is chaotic and what is killing people.
John Tamny, I want to turn now to one of the other big political developments, and that is President Trump's pick to succeed Jerome Powell as chairman of the Federal Reserve. He is Kevin Walsh. He is seen as an experienced hand. What did you make of the choice?
I think people overstate the import of it either way. And how you know this is look at the commentary from conservatives over the last few weeks about President Trump's call to cap interest rates on credit cards at 10%. Op-ed after op-ed pointed out the obvious that if you put a price control on a market good, it's scarce. There will be fewer credit cards and less credit. President Trump has put Kevin Walsh, or he's nominated him to bring interest rates from the Fed down to zero. Well, why would price controls work at the Fed when they don't work with credit cards? And so I think what needs to be recognized is the Fed doesn't control the price of credit in the way so many believe. It also has never controlled inflation in the way some people believe. That is the U.S. Treasury's job. The Treasury is the mouthpiece for the dollar. And so what really worries me about Walsh is that he is an interventionist. We saw this in 2008. He used to brag about how Ben Bernanke told him and his Fed colleagues, try anything to revive the economy. They created a crisis in doing it. And remember, it was Walsh in 2020 who, when President Trump and politicians around the country locked us down over the coronavirus, it was Walsh writing op-eds for the Wall Street Journal saying that the Fed should supply money to the businesses that were destroyed by these lockdowns. The interventionist quality is what people should look to in Walsh, not things he can't control like interest rates and the dollar.
Right, John, I get all your points about the fact that, the government tries to impose price controls, but with this choice, and as you point out, it's a nomination, he has to be confirmed by the Senate. With this choice, I mean, do you think Wash is going to follow what were the sort of data-driven policies that Jerome Powell and that committee took, or will there be a departure from that?
Well, logic says he will get confirmed simply because he's an old hand from the Fed. My sense is that Warsh will moderate a little, but let's be clear, and Powell knew this too, if you're going to be appointed by Trump, there is an expectation that you will do for Trump what he wants. Donald Trump tells anyone who will listen that he likes low interest rates. Can the Fed decree them? Again, lots of luck. Where in the history of mankind, where in the history of governments trying to fix prices has never resulted in abundance? It's never once happened. It won't happen with this Fed. So Warsh could say, oh yeah, we're at zero, or we're going towards zero. Lots of luck having the market follow you with that.
Imani, what are your thoughts on the choice of Kevin Warsh? He's been nominated. This has become very politicized, as we've seen when we look at the attacks that Donald Trump has made on the current chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell. And Trump has made no secret of the fact that he does not like Powell. So what do you make of this choice?
I mean, I think we know that Trump is going to choose loyalists always. If there's one thing that we did not see, or shall I say, have not seen in the second administration that we saw in the first administration, is the extreme turnover in his administration. And so we're seeing loyalists. He wants people who are going to essentially do whatever he says, with little consequences or accountability. So we know that this person is going to do. I know for someone like myself, I'd love to have credit card interest rates tapped at 10%. I don't think anyone would also disagree that that's not a good thing. But there's other things that the reality of how that situation works, as my colleagues was explaining. And so it's not a one size fits all or one move then all of a sudden makes everything affordable again. That's not the case. So I think we're going to see continuing as individuals who are supposed to be unpartisan by nonpartisan positions. We're going to see as those terms end, we're just going to see a bunch of Trump loyalists being in there replaced.
Brendan Bice, what are your thoughts? I mean, looking at what's happened, do you believe that the Federal Reserve its independence may have been compromised, or may be compromised?
Again, I rarely agree with my colleague Imani, but I agree. Trump likes loyalists, and so I think what we've seen is that this president is not going to appoint anybody to any post, especially the Federal Reserve, without his full loyalty and support. And so I say stay tuned, Anna.
Okay, and Brandon, I have another question for you, Brandon, on another subject completely. The Department of Justice has just released 3 million documents related to the convicted pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein. Any surprises there?
I find it interesting. We're finding information about the president, a former president, President Clinton. Very rarely are we hearing any comments about that. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see, the American public is waiting for these files to come out. There still have been no indictments. And I think what I see is this is going to be more distraction, especially now, given the fact that this administration is dealing with the Epstein files, they're dealing with ICE. So I think this is going to have a strong impact on the upcoming midterms, even if there are no direct charges. I just think it's a bad sentiment. And given the fact that you just had Marjorie Taylor Greene resign, and some say that it could be linked to that, I just think where there's smoke, there's fire or not.
All right. So, Brandon, you just pointed out there that you think there could be indictments from this latest document dump?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens from this information that's coming out. Again, we've been talking Epstein for the last year, Anand, and we're still waiting on more information to come out. And so I'm curious to see, my challenge with the Democrats, who are in some cases are pushing this, is, what I find interesting when these documents come out, the question is, Anand, who's on that list? We've been waiting for the Epstein list for almost 2 or 3 years now. And now that list comes out, it could open up Pandora's box. So again, I say stay tuned, Anand, to see whose name actually turns out to be on that list.
Yeah. Imani, it's going to take some time. These are 3 million documents. I mean, they include images, they include videos as well. And we understand that the images in most instances have been heavily redacted. But what do you think is going to be the fallout from this?
Well, I just want to point out to Brandon that, Bill and Hillary Clinton were both held in contempt of Congress recently for their refusal to show up and offer insight, their versions, et cetera. So Bill Clinton has been held or is seeking to be held accountable. So I think that's important to note. I would also say that, yes, Donald Trump ran. A main component of his 2024 campaign was agreeing to release the Epstein files. He was a championing of that. He also was a championing of someone who said he didn't know what Project 2025 was, and we know that that was also a lie. But he was a champion before that. And whether you call it a distraction or the fact that this is literally has been one of the largest cover-ups of sexual assault, violence, and trafficking of young girls, very particularly, but there's so many individuals. And I would think that everyone, regardless of affiliation, political party, the views on whoever is in there, should want transparency in this matter. So with these 3 million documents now being released, I hope that we're going to get, hopefully for at least some of these survivors and many of these victims, their moment to hold the individuals accountable who assaulted and trafficked and sexually abused them.
John Tamny, very quickly, I mean, we are seeing what we know. We're seeing that there are individuals from both parties that are affected by these Epstein files. So do you think that it's going to affect the midterms in any significant way?
No, I don't, because I think people already knew this. People knew about Bill Clinton, and I would add that people have long known that Donald Trump hung around with Jeffrey Epstein. They've always known. You go back to the 2016 election after the revelations from NBC. Basically, Trump was told by Steve Bannon, everyone already knows this about you. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So the idea that this is somehow revelatory, that, oh, by the way, politicians like younger women, rich guys like younger women, this is not news. We can be bothered by what happened, but the idea that this is going to affect voters, I don't think it's serious.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.